Captain Riley Jensen had never felt so utterly alone. The blazing sun beat down relentlessly, casting harsh shadows over the rocky Afghan mountains. Her squad had been tasked with a routine reconnaissance mission to trace the flow of weapons, trafficking through the valleys, but what started as routine quickly spiraled into chaos. Moments ago, an improvised explosive device detonated just meters from their convoy, shredding the lead vehicle and scattering the unit like leaves in a storm. Riley was thrown from her seat, a sharp pain in her side reminding her she wasn't unscathed. The explosion had destroyed their comms and severed their radio link to headquarters. In the thick dust and confusion, the convoy split apart. Some soldiers retreated to the tree line, others moved deeper into the rough terrain. But Riley had a different priority: find a vantage point, assess the situation, and signal for extraction. Alone, injured, and with limited ammo, she had to survive until reinforcements arrived. The terrain was unforgiving. Jagged rocks and sparse shrubbery offered little cover, and the howling wind stirred clouds of dust that burned her eyes. Her boots crunched over gravel as she scrambled up a steep incline, fighting dizziness. From this height, she could glimpse the valley below, dark shadows where movement flickered among the trees. The eerie silence was broken only by distant drone hums and the faint chatter of aircraft on the radio. But her own headset was dead. Suddenly, a deep rumble vibrated through the air. Rayleigh's heart skipped. High above, 2 Apache gunships appeared, their rotors chopping the hot air with fierce urgency. Their infrared targeting systems glowed as they scanned the landscape below for hostile activity. To the pilots, every heat signature was a potential threat. But Riley wasn't a threat. She, as a U.S. officer stranded behind enemy lines, invisible to those who could save her. She tried to raise her radio, voice cracking over the static. "This is Jensen. I'm on the ridge near grid coordinates." Only a harsh burst of static replied. Her breath caught in her throat. Without a clear signal, her presence was indistinguishable from the shadows. The Apaches began their sweep, circling closer. The red dots on their thermal scopes moved with unnerving precision. One pilot called out, "Targets confirmed. Heat signatures detected. Possible hostile forces preparing an ambush." The rules of engagement were brutal and clear. Engage immediately to protect friendly forces. Riley pressed herself against a boulder, heart pounding in her ears. She could see the chopper's searchlights slice across the ridge, the blades of the rotor casting eerie spinning shadows. The bright beam nearly caught her, and instinct urged her to stay still, to become part of the terrain itself. Her thoughts raced. If the gunships struck now, they would mistake her for an enemy combatant. Her own men could be lost to friendly fire. She had seconds to act. In her gear pouch, a small, dusty device caught her eye, a relic from earlier. Tours, rarely used and officially decommissioned, the Ghostlink COM module. The Ghostlink system was a tactical communication device designed to send encrypted emergency signals on a secret frequency. It had been phased out years ago in favor of newer tech, but in this desperate moment, it was all she had. It might be their only chance to stop the attack before it was too late. Hands trembling, Riley retrieved the module and powered it on. The screen flickered to life, its faint glow a lifeline in the growing darkness. She keyed in the emergency transmission code, a series of sharp, precise pulses that could only be understood by those trained to listen for it. Her voice, though weak, carried determination out as the gunships tightened their circles. Riley sent the signal, hoping beyond hope that someone, somewhere, would hear it and recognize the long-lost call sign hidden in the frequency. The night held its breath. The line between life and death blurred beneath the spinning blades as an old signal fought to cut through the static and rewrite fate. Asterisk high above the rugged Afghan landscape, the twin Apache gunships cut through the fading twilight, their powerful rotors slicing the heavy air. The pilots inside the cockpits were locked in intense focus, their eyes scanning the valley floor. Below, through the glowing green of night vision scopes and the fiery red of thermal imaging, Lieutenant Nate Harrow, the lead pilot of the mission, adjusted his headset as the weapon system's computer locked onto several heat signatures, moving stealthily among the crags and trees. "Target acquired," he murmured, voice steady but tense. Multiple signatures converging near the western ridge. Possible enemy presence preparing to ambush friendly forces. The rules were clear. In hostile territory, the slightest sign of enemy movement demanded immediate engagement. Any delay could cost lives. Yet something about the thermal pattern gnawed at Nate's instincts. There was a rhythm and order to the movements that didn't feel right. His gaze lingered on one isolated heat signature, flickering and hesitant, almost as if trying to stay hidden. Below, Captain Riley Jensen's breathing was ragged, her body pressed against a boulder's jagged edge. The gunship's searchlights swept over the terrain like cold knives, threatening to rip away her cover. Her heart thundered as the moment of reckoning drew near. She had no choice but to risk revealing herself if she wanted to survive. But then, a faint crackle echoed in Nate's headset static, interspersed with something else. A faint pulse of sound, barely audible, but unmistakable to a trained ear. "Ghostlink," Nate whispered under his breath. The Ghostlink system was a tactical communication method, long thought obsolete, replaced by modern encrypted radios and satellite uplinks. Yet here it was, a faint signal-sharp pulses, coded in a way that could only come from one source. A U.S. operative in desperate need of help. Nate's heart skipped. The call sign embedded in the code was Rook 3, a field alias he recognized instantly. It belonged to Captain Riley Jensen, a soldier he had believed lost years ago during a mission gone wrong. The years of silence, the presumed death it all, flashed back with overwhelming clarity. "Command," Nate said quickly, overriding protocol. "I'm picking up an old Ghostlink code on the comms. It's Rook 3. Repeat, Rook 3. Possible friendly trapped in hostile territory." Static hissed back, followed by a curt warning. "Negative, Harrow. All signals in the area classified as hostile. Maintain engagement parameters. Do not deviate." But Nate couldn't shake the feeling. He gripped the controls tighter, overriding autopilot. "Form up. Weapons hold," he ordered to his wingman. "I'm going in for a closer look." His co-pilot's eyes widened, but no one questioned the unspoken bond formed between soldiers who refused to leave their own behind. Nate knew the risks. Disobeying orders in a war zone could end his career or worse. But he wasn't ready to let a ghost slip through his fingers. The Apaches banked sharply, descending lower toward the ridge where the heat signatures originated. Nate's thermal scope locked onto a single, solitary figure crouched amid the rocks. The image was grainy, but something about the posture, the slow, cautious movements felt unmistakably human, not enemy. Back in the cockpit, Nate's mind raced. This could be an ambush, a trap set by the enemy to draw fire. Or it could be the chance to save a comrade, a soldier who had been written off, but was still alive, still fighting. "Rook 3, he whispered into his mic. "If you're out there, respond with Ghostlink acknowledgement." The headset crackled again, a series of pulses, 3 short, 1 long. It was the response code. "Alive. Contact confirmed." Nate exhaled slowly, relief mixing with adrenaline. But this was just the beginning. The valley below was crawling, with unseen enemies closing in fast. Time was running out. They had to act and fast. "Hold position," Nate ordered, voice firm. "I'm requesting clearance to engage and extract." Static. "No clearance," command snapped. "Mission parameters stand. Engage all hostile targets." Nate gritted his teeth. War was never simple. But as the shadows lengthened and the night deepened, He made his choice to follow his instincts and save the woman he once believed lost to the unforgiving sands of war. Captain Riley Jensen's fingers trembled as she clutched the Ghostlink module, a piece of gear long thought obsolete, buried deep in her pack beneath layers of dust and forgotten missions. The device hummed faintly to life, its small screen flickering with a ghostly blue glow. It was a lifeline, a secret line of communication once used by a select few in the deadliest corners of the world. Her breathing was shallow, the sharp pain in her ribs a constant reminder of the eyed blast that had fractured her side. But she forced herself to steady her nerves. The Apache gunships were circling, their rotors whipping the night air, deadly eyes searching for any movement. If she could send the Ghostlink emergency code, a precise series of pulses that only the most experienced pilots would recognize, maybe, just maybe, they would know she was a friend, not the enemy. Riley tapped the buttons carefully, transmitting a distress code layered with an encrypted call sign. Rook 3. It was her old field. Name, a ghost from missions long past, whispered only in secure channels. The code crackled faintly into the static, floating unseen through the thick night air. In the lead Apache, Chief Warrant Officer Nate Harrow sat rigid in his cockpit, staring at the sudden interruption on his comms. The static was unlike anything he'd heard on this mission, a rhythmic pulse, a digital heartbeat cutting through the white noise. He leaned forward, fingers tightening on the controls as he replayed the signal, analyzing the data. His eyes widened in disbelief. "That's Ghostlink," he muttered. "That's Rook 3. Memories flooded back. Riley Jensen had been presumed dead 5 years ago, lost in a fierce firefight during a covert operation in Kandahar. Her disappearance had left a permanent scar on Nate's conscience. He had searched for her, reported her missing in action, and slowly accepted the painful truth. Yet here was the unmistakable sign she was alive, trapped and calling for help. Nate, his co-pilot, said, breaking the silence, "You hearing that? It's a Ghostlink signal. But that tech was decommissioned years ago. Nobody should be using it." Nate shook his head. "Not nobody," he said quietly. "She is." His mind raced. What had happened to her in all this time? How had she survived alone in enemy territory? The signal was faint, but unmistakably hers. "Nate, we need to follow protocol," his co-pilot warned. "Command says no exceptions." But Nate's instincts screamed louder than orders. "I'm requesting clearance to investigate," he said into his headset, but the reply was sharp and final. "Negative. Maintain position. Engage hostile targets." Nate bit back frustration. The war machine was inflexible. Still, he couldn't abandon hope. He adjusted the Apache's position, moving lower and slower, eyes scanning the rocky terrain below. Meanwhile, Riley struggled to maintain the signal, the pain in her side worsening with each breath. The device was old, fragile. Any moment it could fail. Then through the static, she heard a faint response, a series of pulses, precise and deliberate. 3 short beeps, followed by a long one. The Ghostlink acknowledgement code. A surge of hope coursed through her veins. Nate's heart pounded as he transmitted back, matching the pulses exactly. The recognition was mutual. Somewhere in the darkness, 2 lost comrades had found each other again. But the danger hadn't eased. Enemy fighters, alerted by the strange comms activity, were converging on her position. Riley could hear the distant crack of gunfire, the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps closing in fast. The Apaches above held their ground, engines humming in tense readiness. Nate gritted his teeth, eyes locked on the glowing thermal signature that marked her position. The old signal, once buried in silence, now shone like a beacon in the night, her only hope of survival. Asterisk. Chief Warrant Officer Nate Harrow's fingers hovered over the controls, his eyes locked on the grainy thermal image flickering before him. The faint heat signature below matched the coordinates where the ghost link pulses originated. His heart pounded with a mix of hope and disbelief. Could it really be her? Riley Jensen, a soldier he once called comrade, whose death had been mourned and accepted, now alive and reaching out through the darkness. "Nate, this isn't a drill," his co-pilot warned. "Command orders are clear. You're risking everything by chasing ghosts." But Nate's mind was elsewhere. He remembered the long nights after the last mission, searching reports, hoping for any sign of her survival. Now, the impossible was happening. "Rook 3 is alive," he whispered, a trembling edge in his voice. "I have to confirm." The Apaches circled lower, their rotors kicking up dust and loose gravel from the valley floor. The enemy was close, but Nate's resolve hardened. He keyed his mic and sent a direct transmission on the ghost link frequency. "Rook 3, respond. Identify." Static filled the cockpit. Then, through the crackling interference, came a faint but unmistakable reply. 3 short pulses. One long, the ghost link acknowledgement. A surge of relief washed over Nate, but the tension remained. This was no routine extraction. This was a rescue mission, hanging on a razor's edge. "Nate, the CO just radioed," his co-pilot said. Voice tight. "Stand down. You're ordered to disengage. This is a hostile area. No friendly forces confirmed." Nate's jaw clenched. He was a soldier who followed orders, but he also swore an oath to never leave a comrade behind. "Tell them to hold. I'm going in." Below, Riley Jensen moved cautiously from cover to cover, limping but determined. Her body ached with exhaustion and pain, but her spirit burned bright. She risked exposing herself, raising a small flare. That cast a brief orange glow over the rocky ridge. The Apache's searchlights snapped onto the flare, illuminating her figure against the dusty backdrop. Thermal cameras locked on her shape, and Nate froze. "Hold fire," he commanded sharply. "That's Jensen." His wingman blinked in disbelief, fingers twitching near the missile release. "You sure?" Nate nodded, positive. "The ground." Commander radioed again. "Negative. All contacts in that sector are hostile. You must comply." But Nate ignored the order. "We have a visual confirmation of friendly forces," he insisted. "I'm authorizing engagement hold. Target suppression fire only." The enemy was closing in fast, Taliban fighters moving stealthily along the ridgeline, alerted by the flare. Bullets kicked up dirt near Riley's position, and the sound of gunfire echoed through the valley. Nate pushed the throttle forward, maneuvering the Apache into a tight hover above the ridge. He unleashed a barrage of suppression fire, aimed precisely to keep the enemy pinned down without endangering Riley. "Riley, can you hear me?" Nate's voice crackled through the headset. "Hold your position. Extraction is on the way." Riley's voice was weak but resolute. "Copy that, Nate. I'm holding." Behind the scenes, a battle raged in the command center. Higher-ups argued over the risks of sending reinforcements into such a volatile zone without full intel. But Nate's insistence and the undeniable signal forced their hand. Every second counted. Nate's gaze never left Riley's form silhouetted in the harsh light. A wave of memories hit him. Past missions, shared laughter, and promises made in the heat of war. The thought of losing her again was unbearable. As the Apaches continued their protective circle, Nate adjusted the comms, maintaining the fragile link with the stranded captain. The Ghost Link signal had bridged years of silence, bringing them back from the edge of oblivion, but danger loomed closer every moment. The next move would decide whether Riley's story ended in rescue or tragedy. Captain Riley Jensen's heart hammered as the orange flare she'd launched flared brightly against the dusky Afghan sky, cutting through the swirling dust like a beacon. The heat signature the flare produced was unmistakable, a direct contrast to the cold, shadowed terrain beneath her. She was exposed now, vulnerable, but there was no turning back. If the Apaches above didn't see her clearly, she would be lost, a victim to both the enemy and her own forces. High above, Chief Warrant Officer Nate Harrow's eyes narrowed as the thermal cameras locked onto the flare's glow. The silhouette beneath it was unmistakably human, wounded but standing steady despite everything. His gut told him it was Riley Jensen herself, the comrade he thought was lost to the unforgiving war years ago. Target confirmed, Nate said firmly. That's Rook 3. Are you certain? His wingman asked nervously, fingers twitching. Near the weapons console. We don't have clearance to risk friendly fire. Nate's voice cut through the tension like steel. She's one of us. Hold fire. Engage suppression only. Below, Riley kept low but visible, her hands shaking slightly as she raised the flare higher. Through the static crackle of the headset, Nate's voice came clear. Riley, this is Harrow. We see you. Stay where you are. Extraction is en route. Her lips moved silently. Copy that. I'm holding position. But the moment of hope was razor thin. From the shadows beyond the ridge, figures darted with purpose. Enemy combatants closing in fast, alerted by the flare's fiery glow. The harsh pop of gunfire echoed, bullets tearing dirt and rock mere feet away from Riley's position. She dove for cover behind a jagged boulder, grit grinding in her teeth. Above, Nate didn't hesitate. He pivoted the Apache into a steep bank and unleashed a precise burst of suppressive fire. Hellfire missiles were off the table. The risk to Riley was too high, but his miniguns roared, spitting tracer rounds down the slope and breaking the enemy's momentum. Hold on, Riley. We're buying you time, Nate muttered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold cockpit. Back at the command center, the tension was palpable. The military brass struggled with the implications of the unauthorized engagement. Riley's mission was black ops, off the books, and shrouded in secrecy. To admit she was alive, let alone call for rescue, risked exposing operations meant. To remain buried. Do we have confirmation? A commanding officer demanded, voice clipped with urgency. Is this the same operative lost 5 years ago? Nate's voice came through the comm, steady despite the pressure. I'm positive. The Ghost Link signals match, biometric voice prints match. It's Jensen. Silence hung heavy in the room before the order came through. Send extraction. Proceed with caution. Meanwhile, Riley's situation grew desperate. She fired a last magazine at the advancing enemy, then ducked into a narrow ravine. The cold seeped through her bloodied uniform, but she couldn't afford to rest. Her only lifeline was the fragile comms link, the Ghost Link signal, connecting her to Nate and the Apaches overhead. Her thoughts raced. She was running low on ammunition, the pain in her side spreading like fire with every breath. The extraction would take minutes, but minutes here might as well be hours. She scanned the horizon for signs of backup. Suddenly, a distant thump echoed, rotor blades slicing the air. The sound was faint but unmistakable. A Black Hawk. The cavalry coming to life. Nate saw the helicopter through his scopes, flying low over the ridgeline, bringing hope on its spinning wings. His focus sharpened. The Apaches would guard the perimeter, suppressing enemy advances while the Black Hawk prepared to land. The battle was far from over. But with the long-lost signal connecting them, and reinforcements finally arriving, the tide was beginning to turn. In the unforgiving Afghan night, fate had woven a fragile thread of hope, held together by trust, grit, and a ghostly pulse. Through the headset, Captain Riley Jensen's breath came in shallow, ragged gasps as she pressed herself deeper into the narrow crevice. The cold night air bit at her exposed skin, but the pain in her side was a relentless fire that refused to fade. She counted each heartbeat like a drum in the silence, knowing full well that the enemy was closing in. Above her, the twin rotors of the Apache gunships thumped rhythmically, their piercing spotlights scanning the rugged mountainside. Chief Warrant Officer Nate Harrow maneuvered with expert precision, his eyes locked on Riley's flickering heat signature. "Riley, this is Harrow. We're holding them back." Nate's voice crackled through the headset. "Just hang tight. Extraction is almost here." But Riley knew the battle was far from won. Bullets zipped past, kicking up dust and rocks. The Taliban fighters had caught wind of the flare she'd launched, and their numbers swelled as they pushed closer, weapons primed and ready. Despite the searing pain and dwindling ammunition, Riley fought to steady her trembling hands. She keyed the Ghost Link device, transmitting updated coordinates to Nate and the command center. Every pulse of data was a fragile thread linking her to rescue. Inside the Apache, Nate relayed the targeting information to the command center, requesting immediate air support to suppress enemy movement on the eastern ridge. He said firmly. The response was slow, hesitation born from the classified nature of Riley's mission. Her presence here was a secret, known to few beyond the highest ranks. Sending reinforcements could unravel years of covert work, but Nate refused to let bureaucracy dictate her fate. "We don't have time," he argued. "She's alive, and if we don't act now, we'll lose her." Back on the ground, Riley took a shaky breath and peered over the rocky edge. The silhouettes of enemy fighters moved like shadows, closing the gap with lethal intent. She fired a burst from her rifle, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating her determined face. Then came a sudden explosion, a distant salvo from the Apache's miniguns, ripping through the attackers. The suppressive fire bought precious seconds, but the enemy was relentless. Riley felt the sting of a grazing bullet, warmth spreading along her arm. Her vision blurred. She forced herself to focus on one thing: survival. Minutes felt like hours as the battle raged. Her strength waned, but the sound of rotors above grew louder. The Black Hawk was near. Nate tightened his grip on the controls, coordinating with the helicopter. The Apaches maintained their deadly circles, guarding the landing zone with ferocious precision. "Black Hawk inbound," Nate radioed urgently. "Prepare for extraction." Inside the Black Hawk, the rescue team raced for hostile fire. Their mission was high risk, retrieving a deep cover, operative with enemies swarming every ridge. Riley's legs trembled as the rope ladder descended. Summoning every ounce of willpower, she climbed, ignoring the pain radiating through her. Body as she reached the chopper's cabin, hands steadied her. The rescue team secured her fast, pulling her inside just as enemy fire erupted below. The door slammed shut, and the Black Hawk lifted, spinning away from danger. Inside, Riley's breathing slowed, relief flooding through her exhausted body. Nate's voice came over the comms, steady and reassuring. "You're safe now," but the story wasn't over. The Ghost Link signal that had saved her life was more than a communication tool. It was a symbol of resilience and hope in a war that often felt endless. For Riley Jensen, the long-lost signal was the thread that pulled her back from the edge, proving that even in the darkest battles, connection could mean survival. The first light of dawn was creeping over the jagged Afghan ridges, casting long, cold shadows across the battlefield. Inside the Black Hawk, Captain Riley Jensen lay strapped to a stretcher, pale and battered but alive. Her breaths were shallow, but steady, the relentless pain in her side, a constant reminder of how close she had come to death. Chief Warrant Officer Nate Harrow remained on overwatch in his Apache, circling low to shield the extraction zone. The enemy had not relented. Their fighters pressed in from every direction, desperate to capture or kill the woman who had slipped through their grasp. But Nate's weapons roared like thunder, cutting down threats with precise bursts of fire. Back at command, the debate was fierce. Riley's existence threatened to unravel layers of covert operations missions, shrouded in secrecy. Personnel unaccounted for, and alliances hidden in shadow. Intelligence officers hashed over the risks of public exposure, while others focused solely on her survival. "Nate, you've got 2 minutes before fuel runs critical," crackled the radio. The tension was thick. "Understood," Nate replied, eyes scanning the landscape for the last threats. Covering evac. Through the Black Hawk's window, Riley's gaze tracked Nate's Apache as it swooped and strafed enemy positions. Every heartbeat was a countdown. Her survival balanced on a knife edge. Her mind drifted back to the moment the Ghostlink signal first cracked through the static. That long-forgotten pulse had been her lifeline, a beacon from a past she thought lost. Now it had reunited them in the most desperate moment. Nate's voice cut through the fog of pain and fatigue. "Riley, you have to hold on. Extraction is coming. We're not leaving you behind." She nodded weakly, clinging to the promise in his voice. But then, chaos erupted. A sudden volley of gunfire hit close to the Black Hawk's landing zone. The pilots fought to keep the helicopter steady as enemy fighters surged forward, attempting to seize the moment. "Evasive maneuvers," shouted the co-pilot. The helicopter shuddered violently as tracer rounds slammed into its side. Inside, the rescue team returned fire, their weapons blazing through open doors. Riley gritted her teeth against the pain, knowing every second was a battle for life itself. Outside, Nate's Apache wove through the storm of bullets, targeting enemy pockets of resistance with deadly efficiency. He knew his fuel gauge was bleeding fast, but abandoning Riley was never an option. Suddenly, the radio buzzed. Command clearance granted for full extraction. Ground reinforcements inbound. Relief flooded Nate's veins like ice water. The tide was turning. With the enemy's advance stalled, the Black Hawk climbed swiftly, carrying Riley away from the inferno. Nate followed, circling once more to ensure their safe retreat. As they rose into the dawn sky, Riley's breathing steadied. The long-lost signal that had saved her life was more than just technology. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds forged in battle. Back at base, intelligence officers began piecing together the puzzle her survival presented. The Ghostlink frequency, once discarded, had revealed a hidden arms network operating undetected for years, a dark web that her mission had finally exposed. Riley's return wasn't just a rescue. It was a revelation, a story of survival, trust, and the enduring power of connection, not in the unforgiving theater of war. Sometimes the faintest signals shine the brightest, and this one had rewritten everything. Asterisk, the roar of the Black Hawks. Engines faded into the morning light as it touched down on the base's makeshift helipad, kicking up clouds of dust that swirled in lazy spirals. Captain Riley Jensen lay strapped to a stretcher, her face pale but serene beneath the grime and bloodstains that marked her ordeal. She had survived against impossible odds, guided by a ghostly signal that had bridged years of silence and secrecy. Chief. Warrant Officer Nate Harrow stood nearby, watching as medics hurried to her side. The relief in his eyes was tempered by exhaustion and the weight of what they had just endured. For years, Riley had been presumed dead lost in a forgotten mission, erased from reports and memories alike. Now she was back, alive and bearing secrets that would shake the very foundation of their operations. The headset on Riley's stretcher crackled to life. Her voice, though weak, was clear and steady. "Ghostlink lives," she whispered, a quiet testament to the technology and trust that had saved her life. Back in the operations room, the room fell silent. Intelligence officers leaned closer to their screens, eyes widening as data flooded in. The Ghostlink signal wasn't just a communication tool, it was a key. a key that unlocked a shadowy network of arms trafficking that had eluded U.S. intelligence for years. Pieces began to fit together. Covert shipments, hidden supply lines, and corrupt officials operating behind a veil of secrecy. Rayleigh's mission had been to uncover this network, but the enemy had struck first, isolating her and forcing her into a desperate fight for survival. Now, her return meant more than just a second chance. It meant justice. Nate approached Riley's bedside, his voice low but firm. "We never stopped looking for you." She smiled faintly, the pain and weariness etched in her features. "I didn't stop fighting." The months ahead promised intense investigations, debriefings, and untangling the complex web her mission had exposed. But for Riley, the immediate battle was over. She had faced the darkness alone, trapped beneath the circling Apaches and enemy fire. And through it all, a long-lost signal had come through their headsets, a pulse of hope cutting through the chaos, connecting past and present. Outside, the sun rose higher, casting warm light over the base. Soldiers moved about their duties, unaware of the extraordinary story unfolding in their midst. For Riley Jensen, survival was just the beginning. Her ordeal had revealed that sometimes the most powerful weapons weren't guns or missiles. They were trust, communication, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of war. As she prepared to share her story with the world, one truth remained clear. The Ghostlink signal had saved her life, and it would save others yet.